It was long ago, when the Red Death was everywhere in the land. There never was a plague that killed as many, and there never was a death as terrible. It was the worst illness of all. First, you felt burning pains in your stomach. Then, everything began to turn round and round in your head. Then, because of the pressure in your body, suddenly blood began to come out through your skin. It was unbelievable, but you began to bleed all over your body, mostly through your face. It was such an illness which had no signs before, came immediately and let you die. And of course, when people saw you bleeding, they left you quickly. Everybody knew that there was nothing left to be done, so nobody wanted to help you. Your horrible red face made them think that it was too late. Briefly, the Red Death was a very short illness, which took about half an hour from its beginning to your end. When half of the people in the land were dead, Prince Prospero, who was a brave, happy, and a wise prince of the land, chose 1,000 healthy and happy friends and took them away from the city. He took them over the hills and far away, to his favorite house in the middle of a forest. It was a very large and nice house, with a high, strong wall all around it. The wall had only one door, which was made of a very strong metal. When the prince and all his friends were safely inside, several servants pushed the great door shut. Looking pleased with himself, the prince locked it and threw the key to the door over the wall into a lake outside. He was very happy, as he was watching the circles in the deep, dark water. He was sure now that nobody could come in or out of the house. There was plenty of food inside, which would be enough for them for more than a year. He and his lucky friends did not have to worry about the Red Death outside. They didn't care about the outside world. It could worry about itself. As days went by, everybody forgot the terrible killing machine outside. Everybody was safe in the prince's beautiful house, and in the house everything they needed to have a good time had been prepared for them. There were dancers, there were skillful musicians, there was beauty everywhere, and more, there was wine. All this and more was inside, just the Red Death was outside. 5 months passed, people were still suffering from the plague outside. 5 months passed, people were still suffering from the plague outside, but the death outside was none of Prince Prospero's business. He was making preparations to give a very special party for his 1,000 friends. It was a masked party of a most unusual kind. Prince Prospero gave this party in the newest part of his great house, in 7 rooms which he almost never used. Normally these rooms were only for the most important visitors, foreign princes for example. They were very unusual, those 7 rooms, and that was why he chose them for the party. It was known that Prince Prospero often had very unusual ideas. He was a very strange person. First of all, the rooms were not in a straight line. Walking through them, you came to a turn every 20 or 30 yards. So you could only ever see into one other room at a time. Yes, it was a strange part of the house. In every room, the furniture was different. With each turn, you always saw something interesting and new. In every room, there were 2 tall and narrow windows, one on the other side. The glass in these windows was colored, a different color in each room. This was one of the prince's ideas, of course. All the plans for this part of the house were made by Prince himself. There is no need to be told, but of course it was the prince who decorated the rooms for the party. The things that were done for the party were the ones he did in his usual, unusual way. Like the glass, each room was a different color, and everything in each room was that same color. The first room, that was at the east end, was blue, and so were the windows. In the second room, everything was purple, like the glass. In the third, everything was green. The fourth was orange, the fifth white, the sixth yellow. In the seventh, strange but real. Everything was black, but not the windows. They were a deep, rich red color, the color of blood. No lamps were put in the 7 rooms. Light came from the windows on the other side. Outside each window there was a fire burning in a large metal dish. These fires filled the rooms with a bright, rich, and strangely beautiful colors. But in the west room, the blood-colored light was horrible. It gave a terrible, white look to the faces of those who went in. Few people were brave enough to enter this room. On the far wall of the black room there was a very large clock. The great machine which started this clock made a low, heavy clanging sound. Once every hour, when the minute hand came up to 12, it made a sound that was so loud, so deep, and so clear. That night the sound was so rich, so strange that the musicians stopped playing to listen to it. The strange music coming from the clock made all the dancers stop dancing. Shortly the whole party stopped. Everybody listened to the sound, and as they listened, some of their faces became white and pale. Some people's heads began to go round and round. Others put their hands to their heads, surprised by sudden strange, dream-like thoughts. And when the sounds could not be heard any more, there became a very strange silence. Light laughs began to break the silence. People laughed quietly and quickly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled. They promised that when the next hour came, they would not be so stupid. They would not stop and listen like that. They would go on dancing without listening at all. But then, 3,600 seconds later, the clock made the same strange sound again. In spite of all their promises, everything stopped again as it had done before. Again, there was that same empty silence, those same quiet laughs, those same smiles and promises, and again the people's face became white, and those strange thoughts went through their minds. Despite all these strange things, it was a wonderful party. The decoration that the prince had done was enjoyed by his friends. At the first sight, the colors that were used could make you think that the prince was a bit mad, but his friends, who knew him well, knew he was not. He not only chose the decorations but also the way everyone was dressed. The prince had chosen really strange dresses for his friends, and many of them were much more than just strange. There was a bit of everything at the party, the beautiful, the ugly, and a lot of horrible. Everything at the party could make you think that this party was just organized for mad people, because it was like the madman's dreams, especially the people dancing to that strange and wild music. They went up and down, changing color as they danced from room to room. They went on dancing until the minute hand on the clock came up to the hour, and then, when they heard the first sound of the clock, everything stopped as before. There were changes within the people. Again their faces became white, and again the musicians stopped playing. Again they smiled when everything passed, and again they promised not to do it when they heard the next sound. The dreams stood still until the great deep voice of the clock died away. Then the dancers began to move once more, dancing more happily than ever. They danced and danced, and on, through every room, except one. No one dared to go into the west room anymore. The blood-colored light was growing brighter and more horrible with every minute. But in other rooms, the party was going faster than ever. People went on dancing in a wild way until the minute hand reached that hour again. And of course, when the first sound of the clock was heard, the music stopped. The dancers became still, like it used to be before everything stopped, as though they had died. It was midnight. That sound was heard 12 times. That same strange, deep, and sweetly musical sound. When the first clang was heard, it seemed like there was no end to the sounds this time. Each sound seems to go on forever, and as those 12 sounds went on and on, people became whiter, their heads began to go round and round. They began to think stranger and more dreamlike thoughts than ever before. Then, suddenly they saw a tall masked man walking slowly and silently among them. Everybody was watching the man walk silently among them. They were trying to guess who he was. Everybody at the party was soon talking about the tall masked man. As the stranger walked silently among them, people looked at him with an anger and horror. They were angry with him because of his strange clothes, horror at choosing that mask. If it was to make them laugh, it was not funny. Even the prince would never dream of wearing those crazy clothes. Everything the stranger was wearing was black from the top to foot. His mask was the face of a dead man. This mask could be named as a death mask, but it was not the mask, but its color that made everyone shake with horror. The mask was red. It was the color of blood. It was the mask of Red Death. Prince Prospero saw the stranger as he walked among the dancers, and suddenly he became mad with anger. He waved his hand, and the music stopped immediately. The prince was quivering because of anger. "Who?" he shouted. "Who dares to do this? Who could stop my party? Catch that man at once. Take off his masks. We will cut off his head in the morning." As soon as Prince stopped talking, the masked stranger began to walk slowly towards him. Everybody, even the brave Prince Prospero, was suddenly afraid. Nobody was brave enough to put out a hand to stop the visitor. He passed very close to the prince, and everybody everywhere stepped back against the walls as he walked slowly out of the blue room, and into the purple, through the green into the orange, into the white, then into the yellow. Suddenly, Prince Prospero was angry with himself for being so afraid. He himself thought how stupidly he acted. There was no need to be afraid. He was the prince. He ran after the stranger. He ran through the 6 rooms, but nobody followed him. Pulling out his knife, he ran into the black room. The masked man, who was walking towards the opposite corner, stopped. The prince stopped as well. The masked man suddenly turned, and a terrible cutting cry was heard. The prince's shining knife fell without a sound on the black floor. The prince fell without a sound next to it, dead. Suddenly, and nobody knew why, the dancers were no longer afraid. A crowd of them ran into the black room. They ran to the stranger who was standing in the shadow of the great clock. When they caught him, the mask and the empty cloth fell to the floor. Everyone cried out in horror. There was nobody inside the clothes. There was nobody there. The man's body was nothing but air. Yes, this was the Red Death. Everybody realized that it was here, among them. He came like a thief into the night. And as the seconds passed, the clanging sound, one by one, people began to die. The terrible death had found them behind the locked doors. Soon, everywhere the floors of the 7 rooms were wet with blood. When the last person died, the last lamp went out. And when that last lamp went out, the life of the clock stopped with it. And all that was left in the palace was silence and darkness.